Dice qual è il titolo del prossimo intervento, lo so a memoria: il giornalismo di qualità in cerca di un nuovo modello di business. Vedete che regia. E abbiamo ospite, ci fa molto piacere, è già salito sul palco poco fa, il direttore del Wall Street Journal, Gerard, che ringrazio, eccolo qua, e a parlare con lui, please. E a parlare con lui il mio collega, uno spolveratore di professione, perché un po' di polvere tutti insieme dobbiamo levarla, Mario Calabrese. Dai, a voi. Tu là.
Buongiorno. Per cominciare vorrei dire che mille grazie per l'opportunità grazie a Andrea e a tutti per l'opportunità di parlare ed ascoltare a voi in questo luogo magnifico, la bella Toscana. Sì? E devo dire che anche se io ho studiato l'italiano alla scuola in Inghilterra, oggi il mio italiano è molto povero, così come tutti inglesi, oggi parlo solamente in inglese. So, thank you very much indeed for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. As I say, I wanted to avoid saying anything in a foreign language that could be misunderstood. I'm very aware of the mistakes that can be made by people trying to speak foreign languages when they go abroad, especially English speakers who don't speak very well in foreign languages. We all remember, of course, President Kennedy famously in Berlin describing himself as a breakfast pastry. And another American president who once said he physically desired the people of Poland. But so I'm going to speak in English. The topic of my talk is quality journalism in pursuit of a new business model. And it's a very apposite, very apt topic, because it's pretty clear, or at least it's widely believed, that the old business model of quality journalism is broken, fundamentally broken. That old business model relied essentially on a mass audience, very large circulation, for newspapers to conduct, newspapers and news organizations generally to conduct quality journalism, which is an expensive business, as we all know, deploying journalists around the world, working sometimes on lengthy projects that don't always produce exactly what you think they're going to produce, is an expensive business. Of course, it was fueled, supported for years by very strong advertising revenues. That was the old traditional model, and it worked for a long time. But again, you probably don't need me to tell you that that old model, based on the print newspaper model, has, as I say, broken. Just looking at some of the numbers in the last 10 years or so, what's happened to our business is pretty compelling. Newspaper circulations in the United States are down by the major quality newspapers are down between 15 and 50% over the last 10 years. At the same time, advertising revenue, the lifeblood of those newspapers, which they relied much more on than circulation revenue, advertising revenues have simply collapsed in the print sector. Advertising revenues are down about 50%, more than 50% since 2005 for American newspapers. Combined print and digital advertising is down by that kind of amount. Obviously, with that kind of level, and by the way, that means that the level of advertising in US newspapers is back down to where it was in dollar terms in 1982. There aren't many businesses around surviving anywhere in the world, certainly not in the vibrant economy that is the United States, that are that have revenues in nominal terms, not even in inflation-adjusted terms, that are back at 1982 levels. Obviously, that's meant pressure for the whole newspaper sector. Nobody has been immune from this. As you again may know, many newspapers, traditional, quality, famous, celebrated American newspapers, have either disappeared or dramatically scaled back what they do. Hundreds of newspapers have stopped publishing completely. Many have gone digital only. Many newspapers, great newspapers in famous American cities like Detroit and New Orleans and Seattle and elsewhere, have stopped over the last few years, stopped publishing on a daily basis. So the newspaper business the quality newspaper business has clearly been in retreat. And of course, another challenge that faces quality journalism is that even as that demand, that the finances to support quality journalism have shrunk, of course, many other different forms of journalism have sprung up thanks to the digital revolution, and it's now all kinds of journalism is practiced globally, particularly in the United States, which couldn't be described really as quality journalism, and is in a form of a kind of Gresham's law of economics. The unquality journalism seems to be driving out the quality journalism, and so these days, so many people seem to read, although a lot of people read more, as we heard earlier today, people seem to be reading much more about things like Kim Kardashian's waistline, or looking at pictures of skateboarding ducks or cute kittens. That isn't really quality journalism, and that is, unfortunately, as I say, one of the challenges we face. So that, unsurprisingly, given that background, there's a pretty widespread view that quality journalism is dead, or at least dying. And I want to just this morning challenge that assertion. I won't deny that we face challenges. I won't deny that we face serious problems in this business and that we are dealing with them not always as successfully as we could. But I think the fundamental proposition that somehow quality journalism is no longer wanted, is no longer in demand, or that we can't build a model that will support quality journalism, I think I can demonstrate that that isn't true. I'm going to talk obviously very much from the perspective of the Wall Street Journal. There are other, obviously, newspapers in the United States I'm aware of. But I want to talk particularly from our perspective at the Journal. I joined the Wall Street Journal 4.5 years ago as deputy editor, having worked before that elsewhere in News Corporation. As you know, of course, News Corporation acquired the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones at the end of 2007. Despite my accent and despite what I said at the beginning, I am actually English, but I've lived in the United States for almost 20 years. I've made my home there and my family's there, and I'm very much privileged and happy to be there. And I'm particularly privileged to be the editor-in-chief now of America's largest newspaper, and a great newspaper. But I'm going to talk to you, I think, about why I think we have managed to defy the conventional wisdom that quality journalism doesn't have a future. Let me just start off with one really simple statistic, which is that for us at the Wall Street Journal, readership in the last 10 years has actually significantly increased, thanks to the opportunities provided by the digital revolution to access our journalism in multiple different formats, still obviously available in print, but obviously increasingly in digital formats. Every month, substantially more now than 12 million people read or view or listen to or interact in some way with Wall Street Journal journalism. That's in the United States. That's in the United States alone. That's much higher. That's a much higher readership on a monthly basis than the Wall Street Journal ever had in the past. So we've actually extended our reach. Obviously, again, that's in large part because of the digital opportunities and the way that we've embraced those digital opportunities. Our digital circulation, and we, thanks to the foresight of people a long time ago, long before I joined the Wall Street Journal, who decided that the Wall Street Journal digitally would be not available for free, but people, if they wanted to read the Wall Street Journal online, unlike other newspapers, they were going to have to pay for it. The very wise decision was made to make the Wall Street Journal a subscriber-only paper online. And since that time, our digital subscriptions have grown substantially. Just in the last few years, our digital subscriptions are up something like 15% just in the last couple of years, actually. Our combined print and digital circulation for the Wall Street Journal is 2.4 million. In the US, higher than it's ever been, makes us comfortably the largest selling newspaper in the United States. And we continue to grow, and we expect to continue to grow. In addition, I would point out that another way in which we've significantly increased the number of people who access our journalism, our quality journalism, is through our global reach. The journal has always had a global reach. It's for a long time, for the last 30 years or so, has had print editions in Europe and Asia. But again, thanks to the digital revolution and thanks to the efforts that we have put into expanding our global footprint, we are now read by tens of millions of people every day, every week around the world. We have not only the English language edition, which obviously which is widely read in Europe and Asia and Latin America and increasingly in Africa and elsewhere, but we've launched in the last few years a series of local language websites, so that we now have 6 local language, the Wall Street Journal available in 6 local languages, Chinese being the biggest, but also Japanese, Korean, Bahasa Indonesia, Turkish and German. Forse Italiano il prossimo, I'm not sure about that. But we have got a global reach now that the journal simply never had in the past. And so we're read more and more widely around the world. And I think we can continue to explore those opportunities and continue to exploit those opportunities. The journal's brand of journalism, what we do, has a very, very high reputation around the world, second to none, I would argue. Obviously, it has been traditionally primarily financial, economic, business news, and we will continue to devote resources to that. We'll continue to make that the core of the journal's mission. But we've also been able to expand into other areas, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And that's, I think, part of the reason that we've been able to be so successful and been able to build a larger and larger audience for quality journalism. So why have we been able to buck this trend, to defy this trend of declining audiences, of declining circulation? I think there are a number of answers. First of all, paradoxically, and despite the fears about the future of quality journalism, I think it is the very quality of our journalism itself and the fact that we invest in that journalism, and since News Corp's acquisition nearly 6 years ago, we've invested more in that journalism. That is a key explanation as to why we've been able to build the journal's standing and why we've been able to build the journal's audience both in the US and around the world. We've added new coverage, as well as investing in our core business, economic, financial journalism. We've added other, both in the print edition and online, and in various digital forms. We have expanded significantly what we do, whether it's general world news, politics, arts, culture. We have been able to take our core audience in the US and around the world and augment it with this additional coverage. I would also say one of the reasons that we have succeeded, and why I hope and I believe we'll continue to succeed, is because our journalism is that we have really cleaved to the traditional, what I believe are the really important traditional values of journalism. I think one of the challenges, one of the reasons that American journalism in particular, but also journalism in Europe and elsewhere, has suffered both reputationally and in terms of audience and revenues in the last 20 or so years, is because I think of a growing alienation and detachment that those newspapers have had from their own readers. And I think what we have tried to do at the Journal is to focus back on the core values. So instead of newspapers increasingly reflecting an opinionated view of the world in their news, which I think is a huge problem, a huge challenge for the news business. I think it's contributed to a lack of trust in the news business, in the US in particular, as people see a particular ideological bias coming through in the news coverage all the time. We at the Journal have avoided that. We know we do have a very strong and very opinionated editorial page, but we're very careful to keep the divide between news and opinion separate. I think it's important that we continue to do that. Our journalism has been focused, has been objective and fair and analytical. I think another reason we've been able to survive and thrive in this challenging era is because we have been able to adapt to the digital environment that we operate in. That is, I think initially when back in I was working at the Financial Times in the 1990s, when at the onset really of the real digital age. And in those early days, I think we all sort of thought that the web, the way to succeed on the web was simply to reproduce what we were doing in the newspaper, the traditional printed newspaper, to reproduce that in some digital format. It took us a few years, I think, and a few failures to realize that that wasn't the way, that the digital environment is a completely different one. It's a completely different medium, and news organizations, traditional news organizations, have to adapt. And again, I don't claim that we've done that perfectly at the Wall Street Journal. We still have a lot to learn, but we have increasingly in the last few years embraced the digital revolution. So whether it is, most importantly perhaps, a real-time sensibility, ensuring that we are covering news in real time, directly, objectively, fairly, in real time, quickly. So when a news story happens, you just heard the story about the newspaper getting criticized for not being quick enough in responding to news about the earthquake. That's what we have to do. If you look at some examples of what we've done recently, the Boston bombing that happened, as you know, a month or so ago, we were immediately covering that story in real time, comprehensively breaking news, breaking developments on that story, going through the day and then into the next day's paper. But doing that in real time, also embracing social media. It's very important. So much of our traffic now to the Wall Street Journal website and to our other digital platforms comes from social media, growing proportion of that. So our reporters have had to become much more engaged in social media themselves and directly aware of what's going on in social media, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or others, and we've embraced that. We've also used the technological opportunities that the digital world provides. So we produce much more video now. 25 years ago, when I started off as a journalist, I started off in television. I worked for the BBC, and back in those days, television was television and print was print, and never the twain met. These days, every news organization that wants to survive has to have a thriving, as well as being a traditional read news organization, it has to have video. It has to exploit all of the opportunities that the web provides, and we've invested a lot in that. We've also invested a lot in building communities. So much as we know of the successful companies on the web in the digital age in the last 10 years have been those that have developed social networks, and we've developed our own networks around our own users and readers. So we've been aggressive in embracing the digital age. We need to be more aggressive, and we are continually updating our procedures and working hard to do that. But I think that's a lesson here for all of us that we can do that. And finally, I would argue, and this is complex because to some extent this challenges what we've done with the paper, with the journal in the US in particular, but I do strongly believe that one of the lessons of the digital era is going to be that there is going to be a tendency of users to migrate towards organizations, towards news coverage that is quite niche in focus. That is, that it is focused in particular areas. You've seen this whether it's sports or whether it's particular websites that focus on foreign developments or social issues, social news. Obviously, we have an advantage there because we have a strong brand and reputation in the business, economic, and financial field. And I think, as I say, while we've been able to extend the reach of the print edition of the United States to a broader audience, we have to be very careful to ensure that we take advantage of the opportunity that we have by being a focused organization, by being a newspaper that people read for primarily for a particular reason, which is for the best business, financial, and economic news that we have. So that's, I think, the reasons that we at the Journal have been able to defy. There are other reasons too. And again, this isn't an argument from complacency. We have got lots of challenges. We have all the time. We're still significantly dependent on advertising revenue, and even though we've been able to grow significantly our circulation revenue, digital circulation revenue in particular, we do face a continuing challenge with advertising revenue because we still depend on advertising revenue for a lot of what we do. And advertising revenue, as you know, as I said earlier, in the newspaper business is declining, and advertisers are becoming much more much more choosy about where they advertise, and indeed much more choosy about how they advertise. They don't, the days of advertising to a mass audience by taking out a huge newspaper, one-page newspaper advert in one of the major newspapers around the world are not quite gone, but they're clearly on the way out. Businesses are looking for ways to market themselves in much more targeted and focused ways, and we have to bear that in mind. We also have to be very careful that we don't allow the demands of the business side of businesses to use us to appeal to readers. We have to be very careful that we protect our journalistic values and we don't let them dictate the agenda in that way. So in conclusion, and I know we're going on to have some questions and answers, I think there is a future for quality journalism. I think in the US in particular, you're seeing a pretty radical change in the way the market operates. I think one other factor which is very important is that the traditional US newspaper model, which was of very large, big city newspapers, hundreds of them across the country, which worked essentially for 100 years or more, is steadily dying away. What the digital revolution has done, it has produced a newspaper business in the US that is increasingly like the European model. That is large national news organizations that compete across the country for audiences. And I think it's pretty obvious that there will be several big new US newspapers that will survive in that era, and many others will go. So there'll be a period of consolidation, and I think, at the Wall Street Journal will be leading that consolidation. So we are optimistic, we're not complacent, there are many challenges that we face, but above all, what we need to do is to keep focused on why we're doing this journalism. Obviously, journalism will not survive if it can't be paid for, and I think that while well-meaning, I think ideals that people have that somehow newspapers can be sustained through philanthropy, through some kind of public support, God help us, from the government, I think are badly flawed. That is not a model for journalism, for quality journalism, and nor is subsidy, by the way, nor is being subsidized by more popular journalism in different parts of companies that perhaps support and subsidize the quality journalism. The only way is to make sure that we produce quality journalism that is self-sustaining, financially self-sustaining. And it's crucial we do that. It's crucial we do that because we know we know the value of quality journalism. We know, and I do appeal to you, particularly the young people here, to consider journalism as a career, but also to consider interacting with newspapers, even more than you do now. Because I think as we face this world of increasingly loud, noisy contributions from around the world, from the web, whether it be or not just from the web, but from television news and from radio too. There's a kind of cacophony of voices, and I think that's that should not be diminishing the value of quality journalism, quality, fair, objective journalism. It should actually be increasing it, because I think people need to have information that makes sense of what's going on in this increasingly complex environment. And they still crucially need organizations that have the resources to expose wrongdoing, to expose corruption in government or in companies, to take on powerful vested interests, and to demonstrate their role as crucial elements of a vibrant and thriving democracy. So I think we do have a future. I know we need to have a future. I know the value of quality journalism is absolutely peerless for a functioning democracy, and I urge you all to take part urgently and fiercely in that future. Thank you very much.
C'è l'acqua. Eccoci, grazie a Gerard Baker. Vi ha già parlato, l'avete già ascoltato. Io però due cose su di lui. Avete sentito che è inglese, ha studiato a Oxford, e ha studiato filosofia, politica, economia, ha lavorato anche in banca, ha fatto l'economista, ha lavorato in banca prima di fare il giornalista. E poi ha cominciato come giornalista, ha seguito alla BBC, ma la sua carriera non è stata solo nel mondo anglosassone, parla l'italiano, ma col Financial Times è stato in Giappone, a Tokyo, e poi da lì è andato negli Stati Uniti. È stato per il Financial Times negli Stati Uniti, poi il gruppo Dow Jones e Wall Street Journal, di cui è stato numero 2, e oggi da gennaio è direttore del Wall Street Journal. Allora, io prima gli chiederei una cosa. Nel discorso ci ha parlato del modello a pagamento che al Wall Street Journal funziona. Funziona al Financial Times. Quello che voglio chiedere è, ma che può servire anche a noi italiani che ci chiediamo molto questo, ma pensa che soltanto i giornali economico-finanziari possano permettersi un modello come il vostro a pagamento, visto che, come dire, hanno un tipo di informazione necessaria anche alla comunità del business in tutto il mondo, o anche l'Economist, oppure può essere un modello funzionale anche per chi fa informazione generalista?
It's obviously a critical question. I think there's no question at all that it is it's easier for news organizations that have a particular focus, that have a particular audience. And I would say, as I said in my remarks, not necessarily exclusively business and economics. Business, economics, finance is one obvious area because it's an area that people, want to access because they are making investment decisions, they're making financial decisions, they're making important decisions that they need to know, are well supported by the evidence, and so they are prepared, probably more prepared to part with cash to do that than they would for others. But I think you're seeing already, increasingly in the United States, there are other areas where where specialized areas of news are starting to gain traction as a subscriber model, whether it be sport. Sport is a very, very popular business. Everybody knows that, again, a very effective way to sell a television network, to sell any media these days is the popularity of sport, and so you're seeing some sports-only channels on the web developing in the United States. You're seeing entertainment as well. That's another area. So I do think there's increasingly an ability for news organizations that have focus to charge. Whether or not a general newspaper that is trying to cover everything can do that as successfully, I'm not sure. I'm not certain it can't happen, but I think it is clearly, when you are in the business of dealing with news that is so widely available for free, that is the situation obviously with most newspapers that are covering general news right now, it's hard. You've got to have some specific selling point that makes people want to spend money on what you're doing. I mean, I just struck yesterday, or the last couple of days, as I kind of surfed the web looking at the coverage of this absolutely horrendous attack in London on the poor soldier who was murdered by terrorists in London on Monday. So much information, if you through Google News or the various other aggregators, is available out there for free, that if you're covering that story as a general news, it's hard to see what makes people willing to pay to access that kind of coverage. So I think developing a niche, developing brands, sub-brands. One thing that's certainly discovered is that people will pay to read particular writers. We've discovered that at the Journal. I know other news organizations have too. There's an appeal about particular writers. There are ways in which news organizations that have a general, that are essentially general newspapers, can reach an audience through paying subscribers, but I think they have to develop these particular opportunities.
Grazie. Ha parlato nel suo speech che il giornalismo di qualità costa. Allora io le chiedo, tutti parlano di che cosa tagliare, il motto di questi anni è stato tagliare i costi, ma io le faccio la domanda contraria. Che cosa non si può e non si deve tagliare? Quali parti dei giornali?
Well, I say to my bosses everything. When the business side comes to me and says, well, we've got to look for savings here, I say nothing can be cut. Everything we do is essential. And actually, obviously, if they put you up against a wall and say, you've got to cut certain areas, and sadly, you don't want to have to do that. But if you do, you can always find areas that can be. But right now, I think that what we need the resources, we need more resources to cover. I mean, the world, as I said, there is so much information out there, most of which is unreliable, really unreliable. It's coming whether it's either got a particular political objective, or it's just rumor or gossip that is retailed supposedly as news. That it's essential that quality newspapers, quality news organizations have the resources to be able to counteract that sort of Tower of Babel quality to what's going on in the news. So right now, I mean, I genuinely believe actually what we're trying to do is to expand what we do. We, as I said in my remarks, we're expanding globally. I would like to add reporters and teams all around the world so that we can continue to expand globally. I would like to add more, again, particularly what I was talking about in terms of our interaction with readers and viewers. I'd like to add more in the video field, and I think we will add more in video. That's becoming an increasingly important part of what we do. More in social media. I think again, there's as I look at what we do as a news organization, and we have large resources. We have 1,800 journalists spread across the Wall Street Journal, 1,900 journalists with Dow Jones Newswires and MarketWatch, and all the various sub-brands that we have for the journal. I'm aware that's a significant news resource, but they're deployed effectively, and I think in terms of the kind of coverage we can offer and the quality of what we can do more. We can do much more in key areas, both in the US and around the world.
Lei viene dalla BBC, è partito da una televisione e ci ha detto già nel discorso e anche adesso dell'importanza dei video. Noi in Italia discutiamo molto sulla chi è abituato solo a scrivere deve cominciare a fare i video, di queste difficoltà. Esistono anche negli Stati Uniti o i giornalisti del Wall Street Journal naturalmente fanno le due cose?
They do both things now increasingly. I mean, some people are obviously, look, everybody has different skill sets. When I worked in television at the BBC, not everybody was very good at doing television. Somebody famously was described as having a very good face for radio. That's inevitably that people are able to do things better or worse depending on their background and their skill set. But nowadays it's actually remarkably easy to, technologically speaking, to do video. Okay, so pretty well all of our reporters are now equipped with iPhones or their equivalent, where you can shoot video. When I started out in television, you had to have, this was in the 1980s, the equipment you needed was a $30,000 television camera to produce broadcastable material. Now an iPhone will produce serviceable material, or a digital camera will, for just a few $100s, will produce really high quality video. So the technology is there, the demand is there. Advertisers are very keen to advertise in video. They like our video. They want to do more of it. We're constantly getting pressure from advertisers, not pressure, but we're getting requests from the business side for us to say, look, if you can do more video, we can run it. And the question is, do your reporters and editors have the skill sets to enable them to do it? And they can be trained. I mean, we have training courses internally where we train people to do more and more video, whether it's learning how to speak to a camera or learning how to shoot video and edit it. People can be trained. So now we have, pretty well all of our reporters have been through these training programs and are just about all able to produce really quite significant quality video.
Ultime due domande. Una, qual è il vero avversario rivale del Wall Street Journal? Cioè, è il Financial Times o il New York Times?
I would say the New York Times is obviously a very significant, very successful newspaper, very large, presence, very large footprint, particularly obviously in the United States. Second to us in terms of total circulation. Hope it's going to stay that way. But they are a very successful, very effective newspaper. Do very, very good journalism. Have a very, very impressive digital operation, and that's growing too. So they're very, very important. Financial Times has more of a global presence, obviously, than the New York Times. The New York Times has something of a global presence, but the Financial Times has a strong presence in Europe, and we compete with them on stories, and obviously also in Asia, where we are stronger than they are. So there are other competitors too. I would add Bloomberg, increasingly and important. They have very significant resources. They're a very important news organization with an increasing presence, not just in the business of financial markets, which has been their traditional business, but they're trying to grow into a broader-based news organization too. So these are all very strong competitors. We don't take any of them for granted, and we don't take our leadership in the United States for granted at all. We're not complacent. We face competition on all sides.
Ultima domanda, lei ha 5 figlie. femmine. Ce n'è qualcuna che sta studiando per fare la giornalista o che vorrebbe fare la giornalista e eventualmente le incoraggia o gli fa cambiare mestiere?
No, they live in America, so they all want to be actors and singers and performers. So they're. In fact, I always like to quote. I do have 5 daughters. The great actor Cary Grant, who was also an Englishman born in England, who emigrated to the United States. He was asked shortly before he died whether he had any regrets in his life, and he said yes, he had one main regret in his life, which is that in his life he'd had 5 wives and 1 daughter, and he wished it had been the other way around. So I like to point out that I'm the man that Cary Grant wanted to be. But no, they look. They do. They read newspapers. I'm sure partly because of who their father is. But they spend a lot. I mean, one thing that encourages me is that the 3 of them are teenagers and 2 of them are younger than that. They spend a lot of time. They spend a lot of time on Facebook, it's fair to say, and they spend a lot of time on YouTube and various other things. But they do spend. They are actively engaged in reading news online, and I think that's encouraging. I think they right now don't think of journalism probably as where they want to be. But as I say, that's because they have ridiculous dreams of glamour and Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. Which once they get over that, I'm hoping they'll want to become journalists.
Grazie. Abbiamo dato di fare un applauso. Abbiamo ancora 10 minuti e prenderei le domande dei ragazzi, mi sembra, e degli studenti che sono qui. Prego, i microfoni.
Good morning. I'm Matteo from Carrara. And are you hearing me in English or Italian?
I'm hearing you in English.
Okay. So as the Wall Street Journal is mainly about economics and finance, and so the language used is very much, complicated and specialized. And besides, as high school students, we don't very much study economics at school. So I was about to ask, how do you think an 18-year-old teenager could make their first approach to a newspaper like the Wall Street Journal?
As a reader, you mean?
Yeah, as a reader, of course.
Well, as I say, what we try to do, I mean, first of all, we hope that we explain difficult economic and business concepts in language that is accessible to everybody. We try very carefully to avoid jargon or to avoid highly specialized analysis, but inevitably, in a lot of what we do, there's a language that is about financial markets and economics and business. But what I was saying again in my remarks is that one of the reasons we have tried to broaden the journal's appeal, and we have succeeded in broadening the journal's appeal in the last few years, is to bring people into the journal, whether it's through our general coverage of news. For example, we covered, we've covered the Italian election here recently. We covered in great detail and with tremendous distinction, I have to say, the conclave for the election of the new pope, and then a really fabulous book authored primarily by Alessandra Galloni, our Rome bureau chief. A fabulous book, ebook about Pope Francis. So we bring people into the journal through our coverage of news that is not particularly business sophisticated, and people can see that we have a high quality journalism covering a range of stories that go way beyond just business and finance. And then we hope, obviously, that people understand, and especially as they grow older and they realize the importance of understanding the way the economy works, that they appreciate our coverage, the depth of our coverage on the economy, on financial markets. Again, our coverage of the European debt crisis, for example, in the last few years has been second to none. So we have enough in the journal, we have enough digitally available in the Wall Street Journal to appeal to a broader audience, an audience that wants to read about politics or the Pope or world events generally, or even culture and arts and various other things like that. But ultimately, we also want to make sure that they read us because they want a better understanding of the way the global economy works. And so far, as I say, we've been successful at that.
Hello, my name is Camilla Wolf from Liceo Classico Michelangelo from Florence, and I will speak in Italian so that everybody could understand me. La mia domanda era: che cosa intende lei per giornalismo di qualità, su che principi si basa e che cosa il giornalismo italiano dovrebbe apprendere da quello americano per migliorarsi?
Well, thank you. Your English is excellent. I will say quality journalism I would define as journalism that is first and foremost objective, fair, reliable. I mean, really, really reliable. We spend a tremendous amount of time at the Wall Street Journal really going through stories. We have a team of editors specifically tasked to ensure that the journalism we do meets the very highest standards. It's really important that. And sometimes it can be, that's why one of the reasons it's expensive. We have editors whose responsibilities, all editors are responsible obviously to ensure that we achieve the highest standards in our journalism. But we have particular teams of editors who go through, especially the major stories, to ensure that stories are obviously not just legally appropriate, but that they conform to the very, very highest standards of journalism. That means objective, it means fair, it means comprehensive, it means reliable. It means in terms of the subject matter we do, we can deal with all kinds of subject matters, but we will deal with subject matters in a way that is serious, that isn't trivial, that doesn't seek to trivialize important events. That is an important part of what we do of quality journalism is investigations, is uncovering uncomfortable facts, as I said earlier, whether it's exposing corruption in government or corporations, or just holding people to account, holding powerful people, holding individuals to account. That's a very, very important part of quality journalism. And just putting all of that together in a way that ensures that our journalism is performing the function that it really needs to perform and that society really needs it to perform, which is accountability, which is explanatory, which is clarificatory. So I think that's how I would describe what we strive to achieve every day in terms of our quality journalism.
Grazie.
Good morning, my name is Emanuela Bortone e studio all'Università del Salento economia e finanza. La mia domanda è la seguente: visto che in Italia gran parte delle fonti di finanziamento del giornalismo pubblico delle principali testate italiane proviene appunto da finanziamenti pubblici, mentre in America si sta proveniva
Mai. Dei giornali di partito,
sì.
No, mi scusi, intrometto, no, perché se poi queste cose si diffondono e continuano a diffondersi tra i giovani sono mortali. I giornali normali, quelli che trovate in edicola che non sono di partito, vivono dei soldi della pubblicità, dei soldi che ci mettono chi li compra all'edicola, oppure vivono dei soldi che ci mettono gli editori quando sono in difficoltà, e grazie a Dio ce li mettono ancora, ma non prendono soldi pubblici.
Sì, però è uscito un articolo
I was going to say that's the first time I've ever seen someone in the audience heckled by someone on the stage. But, anyway, sorry.
No, volevo dire che volevo dire che ho letto un articolo nel quale appunto affermava in modo generale che quasi tutte le testate percepivano finanziamenti pubblici, mentre in America si stava sviluppando il finanziamento on demand. Questo può portare un miglioramento della qualità dell'articolo?
It's a very important question. I mean, I would say, I don't know, I'm afraid, very much about the situation in Italy, but I do know a lot about the situation in the United Kingdom. And there, obviously, the far and away the largest news organization, the BBC, which the BBC employs more journalists than all of the national newspapers in the United Kingdom put together, with some left over. That is a publicly funded organization, funded by a compulsory levy on the population, who have to pay that levy at risk of going to jail if they don't do it. And some people think that's a great system, and some people are skeptical about it. Does it produce quality journalism? Yes, it does produce some quality journalism. The BBC, for example, produces certainly some of the best journalism around. But I think it's a very unhealthy state of affairs, because the BBC becomes an enormously politicized institution. Every decision that it makes, every editorial decision that it makes is second-guessed for questions of political bias. its leadership is often, is suspected of having political affiliations because it's dependent on public money for what it does. I really, look, and again, a lot of what the BBC does is very good, and a lot of what the BBC does isn't very good, but I think the question is, can we achieve quality journalism without that kind of public support? And I think, as I said in my remarks, I think yes, we can. I think we have to be mindful of our audience. We have to make sure, obviously, that ultimately that has to sell. But I think, again, we've demonstrated at the Wall Street Journal that you can produce that kind of journalism, and you don't have to depend on either the largesse or the required contributions from the taxpayer or from the public in order to support you. And I think if you do that, if you do depend on that, I think it's a very dangerous way for journalism to go.
Grazie. L'ultima domanda, the last question.
Buongiorno. Allora, mi chiamo Conte Giorgio, vengo dall'Istituto Superiore di Forlì Popoli, Pellegrino Artusi, e le volevo chiedere come vengono affrontati i discorsi di politica ed economia, differenziando le testate italiane da quelle americane, e come vengono assimilati dai giovani questi ideali di politica ed economia che vengono comunque citati. Grazie. Again,
I confess I don't know very much about the Italian political system. I know you've just had an election and a new government, and there's a lot of engagement and interest in the discussion there. I've been following that. Again, we've been covering that very closely in our own coverage. In the United States, I mean, if the question is about young people's engagement in politics, in the last few years, you've definitely seen young people much more engaged in politics than perhaps they had been in the recent past. The campaign of President Obama in both 2008 and 2012 was very successful in mobilizing and energizing young people, but increasingly Republicans too, who perhaps have a slightly different standing with many young people in the United States. They've done a much more effective job of engaging young people. So I think that actually, and by the way, I think the digital revolution has fundamentally transformed the way in which politics is transacted in the United States, and I'm sure it's true here, with growing a huge presence now in social media, huge numbers of people saying they get most of their political information digitally, huge engagement with the various digital platforms that people have. So I think, and again, that's been very much a way in which politicians have been able to reach a younger audience, and I think that's been very welcome and very effective, and I just see that only growing in the course of the next few years.
Grazie mille a tutti, ma soprattutto a Gerard Baker.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mario, la stella e il tweet. La stella e il tweet.
Lui la stella.
Anche il tweet. Gerard, we would like you to write a tweet.
Oh, a tweet, yes,
for
yes,
us.
yes, certainly.
Thank
Yes,
you
yes,
so
yes.
much.
Thank you very much, thanks. Is this going to be comprehensible in English? Okay. Do I need to put my name? My name?
Yeah, your name
Yeah.
and hashtag.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, what is that?
OPGE. Perfect.
Riusciamo a fargli mettere una preferenza sulla stella o è troppo complicato?
Se tu glielo sai tradurre.
Just send? Tweet? No. Just tweet? Yeah. Okay. Grazie.
Thank you.
Perfetto. Grazie.